Hey, cool kids, welcome back to the Motel Podcast. Hey, I've got a guest here. Honoured guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Mark Beaumont-Thomas. Hi.
Hello. Now, I know you as MBT, so I'm probably going to default to that or Mark or just something.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I've spent my life being truncated, and it's no problem.
a life, a life with truncated nomenclature. Oh, I can't say that word. That word that means names. Right. So, Mark, you are an editor. Would that be a fair way of putting it?
Yeah. I edit non-fiction books for people on any subject that they have written about, and get some fun doing it. Yeah.
Excellent. So I happen to know also that you're a fan of The Fall, and I don't know a great deal about The Fall. I know a little bit, but I thought it would be an interesting idea to talk to you about The Fall and structure it around some songs. So listener Mark is nodding here, like this is news. We have prepared for this. So normally when we run these episodes, me and my usual co-host get 4 songs each. But this time we've gone for 10, which is as many as I can cram into this software. And it's the usual rule. We can't play more than 30 seconds, otherwise we get or potentially get our wrists slapped by PRS. And as a musician who's a member of PRS, I want to play by the rules. I don't think Marky Smith would particularly. Do you know what? Do you think he would care or not about somebody using his music? I think he probably would, actually, wouldn't he?
I think he was, pretty defensive of his legacy and of what he'd done. How he would view rules is another matter. Yeah.
Okay, so before we launch into this and before we go for our first track, I would like you to try and summarize The Fall. Now, it seems wild to me that anybody wouldn't know who The Fall were, especially kind of listeners to the Beat Motel zine. But in the spirit of I'm going to start using words I can say. Inclusivity. Could you give me a Fall 101?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about the Fall is the longevity of them. I mean, 40 odd years they were going, right from 1979 right up to 2017. They are really a 40-year reflection of the mind of Marky Smith, who was quite a incredible character. I share one thing in common with Marky Smith, and that is definitely the only thing I share in common with him, in that I was born less than 2 weeks before he was.
And the name Mark. It's 2
Yeah, and the
things.
name Mark, yes, 2 things, yes. And so their career I've followed in real time, not all that in not in all that much detail much of the time, but in the same lifespan. And I now that he's gone, I mean, he died sadly in 2018, just age 60. A bit like my other hero, David Bowie, I'm massively in awe at the amount that was crammed into his life and works and into the Fall. I mean, they followed no fashion at all. If anything, they set fashion throughout their musical life, starting not really. I mean, they started in the height of or the end of punk and the beginning of post-punk, but in some ways, they were different to anyone else even then. And then throughout the 80s, they went unapologetically quite poppy at times, which actually is great. And I think one of the things I'd like to get across in this podcast is they're not as scary as you think they are, in that they do seem to have a fairly um, scary reputation as being this knotty, difficult band to get into and listen to, and it's they're only for serious music types who think that everyone else has sold out, and the only true flag bearer for credibility is Mark E. Smith, and believe me, there are plenty of people out there who do think like that. But you can ditch all that and just think it's great music. A lot of it, fantastic tunes, amazing musicianship, great inventiveness, amazing lyrics. I mean, one of the things that draws me to The Fall is the lyrical inventiveness of Mark E. Smith. I mean, it just pours out with all of these incredible literary references and all sorts of stuff in there. And so that's endlessly fascinating. Plus, a bit like Bowie, he would Marky Smith would ruthlessly at times and at other times, a lot of the time by mutual consent, change the lineup of the band. I mean, famously, there have been about 60 members of The Fall.
I like you say, there's a mutual consent. What a lovely way of describing it.
Yeah. I mean, actually, listening to people like Steve Hanley and when he interviews people, I think they do actually play down the curmudgeonness of him and try and say that actually a lot of it was less brutal than it sounds. But yeah, whatever the circumstances, he would change the band, switch up the sound with great regularity, and that's what helped to keep it fresh. Which means that from the live at the witch trials in 1979 right up to New Facts Emerge in 2017, across the 32 albums that they made, there is something you can find in all of them. I mean, John Peel famously said, "You must get them all." And when asked what Fall album should you get, and that's not wrong as a piece of advice, although a fairly daunting prospect. And in fact, there is a book that that came out fairly recently called "You Must Get Them All," which chronicles every Fall album. And so, yeah, it's a fascinating history, a fascinating, and for someone who loves music, you can dip into The Fall forever and still find something new. I mean, that's what's incredible about them.
Excellent. So we're going to have a clip. I'm going to choose one of my clips. I'm going to do this now because you mentioned the name of the first album, Live at the Witch Trials, and I've chosen this little bit, which is the intro to a song, so it's not really music at all, just because I think it sets the scene quite nicely for a lot of the other music that we're going to listen to.
After all this, still a lonely bastard. Eggheads, boneheads, queued for them. We were early and we were late, but still, live at the witch trials.
And then no music. I just chose that because what I noticed after kind of preparing all the clips for this is how young he sounds in that. You can really hear it in his voice that he was, how old is he, about 17 when they started?
Yes, I mean, that would have been when he was about 20, 21, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that they're not afraid of a tricky introduction to a track, and quite often, again, that's what can be quite fascinating. It'll start as one thing and then charge off in a completely different direction, and also whatever the noodlings are, or whatever the warm-up bits are, or whatever the ideas just flowing along in the studio, quite often it appears they just started to press record and then didn't bother editing the beginning and the end, and just said, "Okay, you're getting the whole thing."
That's very much kind of what appealed to me. The Live at the Witch Trials is the only album I've heard all the way through, and I discovered it as a teenager, and it was that little spoken bit that really stood out for me. I mean, the music's fascinating and interesting, but it was that. Hang on, I think it was that sense of I think this guy's got something to say, because a lot of the late era punk, well, let's call it late 70s era punk, didn't have that much to say by the time it got to the end. It started to sort of peter out a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge amount of punk what you could very broadly label punk has not aged well. It just seems like fairly basic garage rock and just with attitude laid over the top of it. And I find there's not much of it. I find that's very interesting to listen to. Whereas, I mean, something like this was completely out of time. I mean, there's almost some proggy bits and all sorts of things on Live at the Witch Trials. It's if anything, got too many ideas bouncing around in it, like a lot of first albums do have, where there's so many things that are probably from 3 years worth of ideas that have then ended up going into it. And also with Live at the Witch Trials, it isn't necessarily that Mark E. Smith was the absolute undisputed leader of the band at that point. There were other people contributing perhaps a little more equally to the ideas as well. And so it's got a whole load of things going on that actually then the late albums immediately following become actually a little bit more almost pared back. I mean, Dragnet is very pared back and almost lo-fi in the way it's recorded compared to Live at the Witch Trials. So, I mean, again, a typical example of he wasn't afraid to, it wasn't going to be Live at the Witch Trials 2. It was going to be something completely different, and so it was.
We identified on this podcast, one of the first episodes, that bands that progress are always the bands that we love for the longest time. So yeah, I think the Fall are absolutely. I'm not bringing things to a conclusion. I'm rushing through here, but it's quite obvious that you'll tell from the first, dear listener, you'll tell from the first few tracks just how different they are. So how did the band come about? I mean, how did this chap? Well, these chaps really. How did they form? What city? What was the background?
Well, I mean, they're part of, but not part of a Manchester scene. I mean, I think, Mark is from Prestwich, I think, and so sort of out of Manchester and rather more of a sort of outsider's suburban view of Manchester rather than a hip inner city version of it. And I think they notoriously were quite antagonistic, for example, towards factory records and things like that, which were coming up at a similar time and wanted to be very different. I mean, they initially signed with, early on they were on Rough Trade, but again, they seemed a very obvious fit with Rough Trade, but I think apparently fell out with them and decided to go elsewhere. So I think they always quite enjoyed being outsiders rather than part of any particular scene.
Okay, well let's start with the first of your choices. Now, the title of this one really interests me. It's How I Wrote Elastic Man, and I assume, well, my assumption was when I first saw it that it's talking about Elastic Man by the Kinks, which is I don't think it was a hit, but Elastic Man was on Village Green Preservation Society or Arthur, The Rise and Fall. Anyway, not a big hit at all. And then as I was preparing the clip, it blew my mind a bit that this track was released by The Fall in 1980 and Plastic Man was released by the Kinks in, I think, 68 or 69. And I thought, it's easy to forget that that's not a big gulf of time between the two. That's someone writing a song now about, I don't know. I'm trying to think of who's popular. I'm not really in touch with who's popular. I don't know. Someone popular. It's recent history. It's recent. Anyway, I'll stop yabbering on. I'm going to play it. So this was not on an album, which is, I think, it's a fairly punk thing because everything now is part of the album process and the album. Write the songs. Anyway, I'm going to press play right now. So straight off the bat, having only heard the first album, having only heard Live at the Witch Trials, that really surprised me. I thought it was, I don't even know what it is. I thought it was like rockabilly or something when it first started.
Well, there is quite a rockabilly theme that runs through, or rockabilly style that runs through quite a lot of Fall tracks. They were a bit like, you get rockabilly and the Smiths as well. They like that rootsy music, and there is a very much a Fall version of rockabilly that appears in a number of tracks, and why I wanted to include that one, because it is one of the sort of strands of their style that it's good to show. But it's the lyrics, yes. I mean, you picked up. It's this sort of. I'm not sure it is referring to the Kinks track. I think it's what I like about it is it's sort of almost meta and self-referential of the songwriting process, and which is quite unusual. I mean, there's some great lines in it. You know, life should be full of strangeness, like a rich painting, but it gets worse day by day. I'm a potential DJ, a creeping wreck, a mental wretch. Everyone asks me how I wrote Elastic Man. I mean, it's just brilliant stuff. Yeah.
Hey, it's engaging, as you say. The lyrics, I started looking some of them up, just to mostly to try and understand what he was saying, because his diction isn't always the clearest. And well,
No.
I'm speaking as someone with missing teeth who hisses when they talk, but it had so much character to his voice. And in fact, I quite often think that when people talk about musicians who might not be perfect singers but have good expression, they always talk about, John Lennon, Bob Dylan. I think, well, Marky Smith's there as well. He's not exactly a voice of an angel, but
No, I mean his voice can do. He does do some real singing every now and again. I mean, there's the track "Bill Is Dead," which is a very unusually sort of plaintive song. I mean, he can officially be described as singing on that. The rest of a lot of the time, he does this sort of almost spoken singing, which of course has become incredibly popular again. There are all sorts of bands out there who are using that, and you can see the Marquis Smith influence running right through a load of very current bands. Yeah,
Yard Act, it's really clear, and
yeah,
I like the fact Yard Act are progressing. I like the fact that I love the new single, the Trenchcoat Museum. I think it's absolutely great. That's quite an obvious kind of clear line to me between the Fall and Yard Act. But there are other people. Do you know Anthony Zemeckis?
I know the name, but yeah,
He's played quite. I think he's played quite a lot on Six Music. But I saw him here in Ipswich a few weeks ago, and he said during the set, "Look, I am just a bloke talking in front of a band." And I thought, well, yeah. Now that you say it, there is quite a direct line between Anthony Zemeckis and the
yeah.
Fall as well.
I mean, and a band like Dry Cleaning. I mean, the woman who fronts them. I mean, she sounds like a female Marquis Smith at times, and actually has a very similarly detailed observational style of lyric going on. So yeah, there's a lot of, and Black Country New Road, the guy who's now left, he was, you could tell, again, a very observational, detailed, spoken style of singing. Yeah, it's great.
So that's kind of bands now that are obviously influenced by the Fall, and they are, for me, they are one of those bands. A bit like there's a cliche about the Velvet Underground saying only 1,000 people bought the first Velvet Underground album, but all of those 1,000 people formed a band. I think the numbers probably aren't quite the same for the Fall because they released so many albums, but they are a musician's band. They do seem to be in favour with people who are musicians and play in bands.
Yeah, I think that's right, but I think that's also this sort of mystique as well around them that can actually be off-putting to the general listener. And I think don't feel you've got to be a musician to appreciate them. They're open to everyone.
I think, to be honest, a lot of it is a bit more challenging if you're a musician. But I picked something out. So we're talking obviously about kind of their influence on current things. But one thing that I interested me about how I wrote Elastic Man is I mentioned the rockabilly at the start. But there's also something in there to my ears which was a lot more linked to what was going on at the time around 1980, and the little guitar bit, the little loop guitar. I know it's being played, but loop guitar that doesn't quite finish the phrase before it then starts again. That's really like krautrock or Can or
Yeah.
Noi or something like that.
Well, actually, famously, he is Marky Smith was a big fan of Can, and in fact, name checks Damo Suzuki.
I am Damo Suzuki, yeah.
Quite, yeah, which is a brilliant track, and so yeah, he was quite, I think, a krautrock fan, yeah.
Wise man, right? Now, looking at the lineup of the band at this time, I know we had lots of different people coming and going, coming and going from the Fall, but in the lineup, I'll mention the most obvious one last, but Craig Scanlon, was he on the first? Is this the same lineup as the first album?
No.
God, he changed it really fast then.
Quite different, yeah. Martin Brammer had left, Una Baines had left. There are various people who are no longer there. I mean, this lineup is with bringing in Paul and Steve Handley, the two brothers, Paul Handley on drums, and Steve Handley, who's the longest running Fall member besides Marky Smith. I think I'm right in saying he was in the band for 20 years and wrote an amazing book called The Big Weekend, Life Inside the Fall.
Quite a thick book as well.
Which is, I've got a pile of Fall books. I wanted to mention books about the Fall. This is probably my favourite. I mean, it's funny, it's candid, clearly the love-hate relationship they had is at times tragic, at a lot of times absolutely hilarious. But the Fall sound, there's this thing, the Fall sound. I mean, in many ways, during the period throughout the 80s and into the 90s, is driven by the bass guitar of Steve Handley, and it could be said that that's the engine room of the Fall. And so, yeah, and Paul and Steve Handley now host and run a really good Fall podcast called Oh Brother.
Oh, right.
With the name of a Fall song, Oh Brother, and they interview all sorts of interesting people. I mean, ex-members of the Fall, but then there are well-known Fall fans, super fans like Stuart Lee and people like that who they interview. But Clint Boone and Tim Burgess, various people from the sort of Manchester scene who they know, and John Leckie, who was a producer. They're I think I have listened to every episode. I don't listen to all that many podcasts, but that is highly recommended and to check out. What's hilarious is that they themselves get into disputes about when things were recorded and who was there and who was in the lineup, and there's so much of a complicated history that even they who were there at the time can't remember some stuff.
Unsurprising, just through the pace of how often they released music. I'm going to include links, as many links as I can in the show notes. So I'll look up the Oh Boy podcast, because you mentioned
Oh Brother. Yeah.
Oh Brother. You mentioned several people there who I'd be really interested in hearing their thoughts on the Fall, especially like John Leckie as a producer.
Yeah.
Kind of, because he's someone I want to read up on, because he produced a lot of my favourite bands in the early 90s. He was the real go-to for pretty much the whole scene. So I'd be really interested in that. Now, talking of histories and other members of the band, the name that sticks out there most to me is Mark Riley.
Yes.
Who,
yeah.
I mean, as a teenager, I knew him as the boy Lard, because he was on the evening show with Mark Radcliffe.
And of course he's still there.
He's still there. And at first, he didn't really talk much about the Fall on the radio show, but him and Mark Radcliffe go back to the 70s. They've known each other a long time. And then he went through a brief phase in the early 90s of having a bit of fun with it. And one of the things I used to like about Mark Radcliffe's Late Show on Radio 1 is they do kind of skits I mean, it sounds really weird to say it now, but they would do little recorded bits, and it's one of the things when they then transferred to daytime radio one just didn't really connect with anyone at all. They were just like, what the hell is this? But he did, I wish I could find it, Mark Riley did My Life in the Fall or something like that, and it was a series of little skits about being in the fall. And again, the time span back then, that wasn't that long after he'd left, but they were really funny. They'd always end up with some calamity, like Marky Smith insisting that he played with cricket or oven mitts on that he'd glued to his. Just it was always full of this stuff. And I can remember the time thinking, I can't really decide if that's real or not, because at the time Mark Riley was putting himself over as quite an absurd character. In a fun way, I mean that in a nice way, but really not the sort of, he's still fairly daft now, but now he's a bit more of a sort of elder statesman and curator of interesting music. But so So what's the story with Mark Riley? And I'm hoping that the press release about him being kicked out isn't apocryphal. I'll ask you about that in a minute.
Gosh, there are so many stories of people being kicked out. Yeah, I mean, this is the one about. I mean, somebody got sacked for eating a salad, or supposedly, yeah. But no, I mean, I think he had. There was that sort of jostling of power going on. I think I think it was a little bit before, in the relatively early days of not necessarily it being a Marky Smith autocracy. And I think Mark Riley was one of the people who was prepared to stand up to him at times. And I think, there would be some fruity arguments as a result. But
it is interesting. It's difficult to see that now because, really, as you say, really do think of the Fall as being Marky Smith. What did he say? If it's me and your grandma on bongos, it's still the Fall.
Yeah.
So the idea is somebody else trying to get their thoughts across on anything to do with the Fall, especially Mark Riley, just seems really strange.
Yeah.
The quote. Do you know? There's several quotes that allegedly Marky Smith explained why he fired Mark Riley.
You just remind me. I mean, yeah.
Well, the one I heard is that the press release said, we have parted ways with Mark Riley because he's a fucking idiot. As a press release out to the enemy and sounds and whatever. But the other one is that Marky Smith fired Mark Riley on his wedding day, for one, which I had heard from several different kind of sources.
Yes, I mean that's in the book, in the Steve Handy book, yeah.
But his reason, one of the other reasons he gave for firing him, and I imagine Marky Smith just made up reasons whenever he fancied, was that when the Fall were on tour in Australia, he caught Mark Riley dancing to Deep Purple.
Yeah, well, I mean, that is a sackable offence, yeah, well, he shares that with he shares it with Woody Woodmansey, who was sacked by David Bowie on Woody Woodmansey's wedding day. So.
Oh God, it was, wasn't it? That might have been what I was thinking of, actually. Oh dear me, I'm getting my folklore confused between Mark Riley and...
No, it is. No, that is reminding me. It is in the book. Yeah, there's. So yeah, and of course there's a whole. Again, I think that all this sort of folklore and all of these stories of sackings and arguments, and I mean, there was a fight on stage in New York where they ended up briefly in jail and all sorts of things. I think, to me, while they're fun stories, I rather just stick to the music in some ways. But yeah,
sometimes I think it does help sort of turn bands into legends. One of my favourite bands, The Replacements. The stories, yeah, you're right. They can sort of become larger than the music, and it's the music that's really interesting. The thing with the Fall, though, there is so much folklore around Marky Smith.
Yeah. I mean, another book which is really fun is this one, The Fallen, where Dave Simpson tracks down and interviews as many people as he can who used to be in the Fall.
It's quite a task.
Quite a large number of people, some of who were only in it for, I don't know, almost one song or an afternoon or something.
There was a parody, I can't even remember where I saw it, but early days of the internet, exclusive interview with Prince Harry, who confirms he will be playing bass for the Fall. It might be one of Stuart McConey's things that he used to do in the NME. And it was a parody of Prince Harry when he joined the army, saying, every person's got to do their duty for the country and whatever, but it's all just flipped around to like, I'm going to be playing bass for the Fall because everyone's got to do their duty and everyone's time comes to be in the Fall. And
yes.
Okay, so while we're still on the same lineup, then let's go for the next track, which is "Leave the Capital," which is I'm going. By the way, listener, I'm going off Mark's notes here. It'd be disingenuous to make myself sound like I'm knowledgeable here. Mark kindly made notes, which is making my life very easy. So, "Leave the Capital," which is the last track on Slates from 1981, and as we say, it's the same lineup as Elastic Man. Incidentally, before I press play, Capital is spelled Capitol.
Yes.
Not CA.
Yeah, I think that is. There's quite a lot of words that are either made up or misspelt intentionally right throughout the Fall, and I think this is a nice ambiguity between. I mean, the capital you would think of as Washington DC. It's that sort of feel, but actually, it's also talking about London. So yeah,
I thought the spelling. I think that's the same spelling as Capitol Records.
I
don't know. It's, as you say, there's all these ambiguities, which, if deliberate, are kind of genius, really. Anyway, let's play the song. Dusty pictures of white frock girls and music teachers. Clean water's poisons for the system, and you know in your brain. Leave the capital, except this Roman shell, and you know you must leave the capital. Just. It doesn't even sound like the same band. I mean, unmistakably Mark E. Smith, but the melodies and the rhythms, that's good music. I think it's really simply a good band.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me about that track is it's actually got an American feel to it. It sounds like that chugging. It could be almost the Byrds or someone like that. I mean, it's so there's so many influences they pull in and then reshape for themselves. They're not. I think that's what's great. They're not afraid to pick and choose and take all sorts of things. I mean, that's the other tracks. Some of the other tracks I've picked are deliberately, again, completely different and in style to any sort of dense punk, post-punk thing that you might just bracket the Fall into. And I think, I mean, Slates is it an album? Is it an EP? There's this great debate. It's only, I don't know, it's about half an hour long, but then some great LPs are only half an hour long. It does officially get, I think, referred to as an album in the You Must Get Them All book. So I'm counting it as an album. And it is one of the, as a sort of taster of that whole era, just those tracks, just go away and listen to those, and you're getting a sort of condensed bit of brilliance of that whole Fall era in 6 tracks. So that's why I've included something from Slates.
I probably should have asked you this before we started recording, but have you put these on a Spotify playlist or anything?
I can do, no, but I have got a Spotify playlist I put together for that Fall presentation. I think you might have seen that I did. Yeah.
Oh, 4N networking. No, that'd be good. I mean, I don't want to sort of stick dogmatically to this, but I really wanted your personal take on the tracks rather than, these are widely considered as. And
I mean, there is a canon of which some of these are in it, quite a few are not. They are my choices, yeah.
Okay, so the next track we've got is LA, and it's from This Nation Saving Grace. Hang on, is that the title? This Nation Saving Grace, or are you
Yes.
saying?
Yeah, that's the name of the album. Yeah. Yeah.
Because of full titles, I thought the From was part of the title, but
Oh,
there's somebody new in here who's co-writing, and there's actually quite a few more members as well. So I'm going to play this, and then we'll have a chat about it. So this is LA. So a few years, there's 4 years between that and Leave the Capital, but again, it doesn't sound like the same band to me, especially not the vocals. Vocals are a real surprise.
This is the introduction as an influence and a big influence throughout quite a period of what is Marky Smith's wife, Brix Smith, who, again, and I can thoroughly recommend another book, The Rise and Fall and the Rise of by Brix Smith Start, as she's now known, and her life, which is quite extraordinary, actually. I mean, she's American, and her life she had before and after the fall is as remarkable as her time in the fall. And in fact, she's carried on making her own music. She's had albums out fairly recently, but she brings a sort of pop swagger to the fall that I think a lot of some purists who go, this is not Live at the Witch Trials or Hex Induction Hour. This is bordering on pop music. I think go with it. I mean, the riff in that and the absolute, well, I use the word swagger. I think it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, there's some really funny little bits. There's some bits that do signal it out as being the Fall, like the fact the drums are out of time at the beginning, but it's because some little sounds like synths or something. So there's quite several more people in the band now.
Yeah,
so I'm just counting them. So Simon Rogers, Craig Scanlon, Carl Burns, Brix Smith, Steve Hanley, Marky Smith. So there's 6 of them now. So,
yeah.
So was Brix keyboards? I can't remember what she
did. No, she was on guitar as well, and there's some great videos you can find on YouTube of this lineup of the band, and they just look absolutely super cool. I mean, they just look absolutely brilliant. And in fact, the next track chronologically that I've come up with is even more so, that lineup just showing them in absolute brilliance. So I think that female influence, and actually the female influence is there've been quite a thread of female members of the Fall. I mean, there's early on, Una Baines, their first manager, was a woman, Kay Carroll. Brix, and then there's and then later on, towards the end, Marky Smith's third wife, Eleni Palou, she has again adds a whole layer of influence to it that I think perhaps, I don't know, perhaps the female influence was one that could be a little bit stronger with him, and he would accommodate more than a male influence, in that it seemed the band changed with a female influence, I think always in a good way. But you can see the Fall is seen as a sort of blokey band full of serious musical blokes, and actually a lot of Fall fans are serious musical blokes. But actually, I think what is great is this female influence that runs through it all as well.
So what was happening at the time with the band? Because something I've never really figured out is if they have made any money. Because the early albums, the production's okay. It is what I would expect for someone recording in probably not the best studio. But LA, everything with this track, everything just opens out. And it starts to sound like a properly produced band that have recorded in a proper studio. So,
you mentioned John Leckie. I mean, this album is produced by John Leckie.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
I mentioned John Leckie, but it shows that they could pull in a name to produce them. And yeah, I mean, they had this period, and actually through to probably a high watermark of the infotainment scan in whatever it is, the early 90s, where they have singles that get in the charts like Victoria and Ghost in My House and so on. There was a time where they made money, yeah.
Good.
But a lot of the time where they were subsisting sort of one deal to the next and touring relentlessly. I mean, they did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of gigs. I mean, they may well be. Nobody can actually come up with an exact figure of Fall gigs. I think there's so many, but they existed on touring, and they're just a relentless thing of virtually an album every year, you know.
Let's have another track from this period then. So this is New Big Prinz. Is it Prince or Prince?
Prince, yeah.
Prince.
Yeah.
So it's Prinz.
Big Prince. A big Prince. Rock the record. Rock the record. Rock record. Drink the long draft. Drink the long draft for Big Prince.
I was just thinking I could probably play that bass line. It's interesting though. You're talking about the swagger, and since you pointed that out, I don't want to keep projecting forward to other influences, but I mean Arctic Monkeys is it's there fairly clearly, isn't it?
Well, I think I included this because if I was locked in a room and asked to name my absolute favourite Fall track, I think this might be it. I just absolutely love it, and it has that. I mean, there's a track called, and it's almost one of those phrases like "Totally Wired" and "Hit the North." There are various phrases that have become headlines that get used lazily in all sorts of different contexts. But one other is another Fall track called "Glam Racket," and that glam. I mean, we talk about a rockabilly thread. There is a glam thread that runs through quite a lot of Fall stuff, and that stomp, that sort of glam stomp, they're again not afraid to use that, and it's I don't know, it's a bit T-Rex, a bit, could even be the Sweet. I mean, you know, I don't know. There's all sorts of stuff going on there.
Very effective.
Yeah, and it's again, there's a fantastic YouTube Tony Wilson program. Him I think somebody's recorded it straight off the telly. One of Tony Wilson's late night music shows from that period, and them doing this in the studio, and it's just absolutely brilliant. Yeah, it's from an album called I Am Curious Orange, which was a mad Michael Clarke ballet performed at the Edinburgh Festival, of which, frustratingly, there is no video footage, apparently. So a completely out there thing. But that track is the first track and is just genius, yeah.
So how was he regarded in musician circles? You say that he didn't like to be a part of a scene or didn't like to be seen as too kind of glued to it, but mixing with Edinburgh Fringe people and ballet dancers, it just doesn't seem like an obvious thing.
No, that's right. Well, there was some other. He did I don't know, was it an opera or something called Hey Luciani about a pope? And I mean, there's all sorts of incredible stuff he did that's outside of music. He wrote a screenplay for a horror movie that got finally got published not that long ago, called The Otherwise. I mean, he was so broad in his artistic vision. I mean, I think in terms of other musicians, I mean, he was famously as rude as Noel Gallagher is about people. I mean, he would be very abrasive about anyone who he thought was, um, you know, wrongly popular or that he didn't like. And so I think there was probably a bit of a love and fear relationship between Marky Smith and various other musicians.
I'm always surprised, just speaking as a musician, I'm always surprised that people are like that because, well, as a musician and a promoter, generally we don't hire bands like that twice. Even if they do kind of pull a decent crowd, but there must be enough niceness, enough pleasantness kind of going
Well,
on to maintain it.
He famously had, of course, an interesting relationship with drink, and would be his rider was quite a large amount of drink in the dressing room, and
Such a good story about that.
It could get a little unpredictable when a little bit worse for wear. But no, I mean, they never played stadium sort of thing, but they were such a staple and such a hard-working band on the circuit that they would just keep getting booked. Yeah.
Very cool. I've got a story about the rider, which is linked to a time I saw the Fall live. I assume you managed to see them live at some point?
I did. Yeah, I did. Only, I mean, I feel very shamefaced to say I only saw them once, which that was very late on in 2016 at the in Leeds, the Belgrave Hall, when they were doing stuff from one of their last albums, and he was it was great. I felt why have I never seen them? I've got to go and see them. Very much an omission, given that they were. I mean, it could be argued that a huge part of their appeal was as a live band, and on podcast on the Mighty Fall group on Facebook, of which I'm a member. I mean, they have the daily portion will be what gig was it this particular day of the year, and there will always be some from somewhere around the world, and many of the members of that group saw the Fall dozens, in some cases hundreds of times. I mean, there are people who have seen the Fall many times. Yeah, my main quasi live experience of the Fall was, and I guess what I grew up listening to, or was the biggest appeal for them early on, was the John Peel sessions, which are just absolutely fantastic, and they are, I mean, madly, they are out of print, and you have to pay a lot. I looked up this morning, you can buy this 6 CD box set for 150 quid on Amazon because it's quite rare now. But they did, whatever it is, many, I think they did the most sessions for John Peel of anybody. 24 John Peel sessions between 1978 and 2004. There's 97 tracks on this, and they are nearly every one is what you could call the definitive version of that track, better than the album version. And they did it, in one take at Maida Vale or wherever it was, and they are just fantastic. So that proves that they were the ultimate live band, you could say, and that if they can deliver the goods time after time in a Peel session rather than take 23 in an album recording. Not that they did many takes. I think a lot of stuff was done in very few takes for the albums. But though that is live to me, because and particularly since the fall, since Marky Smith died, the slew of live albums that has come out is incredible. Often with dodgy recording quality, and I actually prefer to listen to this where you're getting, the live brilliance, but without the fuzziness of the recording. Yeah,
without the terrible. Well,
but this isn't on spot. You can't. It's not on streaming. It's not. And you look up Peel sessions on BBC Sounds, nothing, which is a soapbox I could climb on and say why
there's no Peel sessions
available. But there we are.
Peel sessions were such an important part of music.
Absolutely.
For God, so many people. I've only got the Stiff Little Fingers and Spiral Carpets ones, but God, it makes me wince when I think there's a second-hand record shop here in Ipswich called Out of Time Records that I used to spend all my time and all my money in as a teenager, and the amount of Peel Sessions albums I saw then on Strange Fruit Records that I wish I'd bought then, even if I didn't listen to them for 30 years, because there's so many bands that I absolutely love now, and we just saw them all the bloody time, just never bought them. So that's my own kind of weakness.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some great BBC session albums. Cocteau Twins, Stereo Lab, all sorts of people that have done some great sessions. And, as a license fee payer, this stuff should be online for us to listen to.
It's ours. I'm amazed there is so much stuff out there for the Fall, because they must have gone through so many record labels. The rights and licensing for the Fall must be a nightmare.
I think what's happened, I think Cherry Red Records seem to be the main player. I think there's a lot of stuff has got reissued in the last 2 or 3 years and of course with the explosion in interest again in vinyl, you can get some very nice fancy vinyl versions of pretty much everything now, and they're busy reissuing on vinyl some of the later albums, some of the 90s albums, like Code Selfish, I think has just come back out on vinyl. And so, if you're really into vinyl, you can go off and spend a huge amount of money on the Fall right now.
Yeah. I just to go back to the Fall live, I've just realised I saw them. When did you see them in 2016?
Oh gosh, I can't quite remember when it was, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, I'm looking at your notes now. You said it was May 2016. I saw them, I think, also in May. No, it might have been June. I saw the Fall playing at Stuart Lee hosted or curated an ATP festival.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
all Tomorrow's Parties, which I went to loads of them, and we're going to do an episode just about ATP because they were so brilliant. And I can't remember what I was doing, but I managed to miss most of the full set. Well, first third of it, and I'm still kicking myself now. I don't know how I did it, because it was Prestatyn Pontins, which is a tiny little place.
Yeah.
And I can remember figuring out the full run and pretty much running from my chalet to go see them, just because they're one of those bands that, I mean, sadly at the time we didn't know how few chances we'd have of seeing the Fall, but they were one of those bands that I've got like a list of bands that if they're playing near me, I'll go. I don't have to know the records. I don't have to know everything about them. I'm just going to go. And the end of the set was so wild. It was so visceral. Much overused word, but it was so aggressive in a way that really surprised me. And what Marky Smith did, he walked around at the end of the set. He walked around all the amps on stage, and he turned every single knob of every single amp to full, which just sounds horrible. I mean, it's awful.
That was one of his famous tics, that he would go and mess with the amps, either turning them up or down or messing the whole setup.
That was the sound engineers.
In fact, I was looking at, he even did it. 2 videos I'd recommend. I mean, there's their Glastonbury appearance in 2015, so just the summer before we're talking about. The whole of their set at Glastonbury is available on YouTube. That's well worth a look. And also, Marky Smith's appearance with Gorillaz at Glastonbury in 2010, doing a track called Glitter Freeze, which is with the full Gorillaz band.
Wow.
And Damon Albarn is obviously a big fan. And he comes on, and the whole way he does it is just absolutely brilliant. And as he's going off, he goes up to one of the amps and starts, it's not even his band. He goes,
Still does it.
Briefly twiddle with one of the amps there, yeah.
After doing that, he went to the back of the stage and there was a curtain hanging up because these ATP festivals were always in Pontins or Butlins, so there is a stage and whatever.
Yeah.
And he went and he clearly sort of tried to make this big dramatic thing about sort of, I am leaving the stage, and the band was still like in absolute full thing. And he grabbed this curtain and he pulled it really hard, and it sort of fell behind him, so sort of obscuring him. But it was clearly the back of the room because the curtain didn't go all the way to the floor. And all you could see for the last couple of minutes of the band set was Marky Smith's skinny little legs in shorts, like sticking out from underneath. And he stuck to it. He committed to it. He didn't move. Yeah. But clearly he must have thought that was the way to get off stage or something. Swung this curtain and ended up just kind of trapped there because you couldn't really come back from that very easily.
No,
did you?
No.
That I mentioned earlier a story about Marky Smith and riders. At ATP Festival, the organisers themselves have written about this. The Fall wouldn't go on stage without two things: a ridiculous, massive rider, which I'll come to in a minute, and the other thing is they said they'd only do it. Marky Smith said the Fall would only play at ATP if they got paid a satchel of money, and it had to be presented to them by Stuart Lee. Now, knowing now what we know about ATP and how badly it was run and how this festival, they went bust during the festival. So he was probably quite wise. But the story about the rider is that it was so long and required so much alcohol for the band that they didn't have it. The promoters didn't have that much alcohol. So Marky Smith was the management, whoever said, look, the alcohol has to be in our chalet or we're not going on stage, because you get a chalet when you play at ATP, proper weirdly English British thing. So they essentially emptied all the bars of the venue, just took everything they could. It was something stupid like 30 bottles of vodka. It was more booze than any band could drink, and put it all in the Fall chalet, Marky Smith's chalet. Kind of happy with that, he went off and went on stage. Now, the problem with taking all the alcohol away from a music festival is that's the only way you actually make any money. So the organizer, the number one guy, I can't remember his name, of ATP, while the Fall were on, he broke into Marky Smith's flat and with a couple of trolleys, or imagine a bunch of trolleys, stole back the entire rider. Yeah, and he only revealed it recently because I think Marky Smith called the police. And it became this whole massive thing that I can remember it being in, like, I don't know, probably read on the NME website or something, or somewhere saying, Marky Smith complaining about being burgled at ATP. And I can remember going, oh shit, that's awful. It's not that kind of festival. It's not like the sort of place you get burgled, but unless you've got all the booze for the entire site and the organizer wants it back. But yeah, as you say, there are many, many stories. Let's have another bit of music because we're running out of time, actually, I'm afraid. So this is The Mixer. I'm going to play it and then we shall talk about it afterwards. I'll let you lead this one.
Yeah, again, this to me is a great example of, you do not have to be frightened by the Fall. This is just a fantastic track, but what's a fiddle doing on there? I mean, suddenly they've got this guy, another band member, vocals and fiddle. I mean, it's almost Come On Eileen is edging towards, but actually, I think the tune is fantastic, and it's on a different league to that, in my opinion. But it's another change of sound. It's something completely different, and I think that there's a bonkers video that accompanies this, and that it's pretty commercial stuff. I mean, having said that, I don't think it even remotely troubled the charts in any way, shape, or form. But and there are some fantastic remixes of this that go on and on and on, which are just brilliant. So yeah, love it.
Because you kind of raised my awareness of the use of language in everything. Did you get the word? I'm looking at your notes again. Did you get the word fiddle from the sleeve notes?
Fiddle is from the sleeve notes, yeah, of the who's on it, yeah.
Because violinists who consider themselves violinists, serious musicians, it's a semi-offensive term to use the word fiddle. I say this as someone who, I've got a violinist in my band. I don't think she'd give a shit, but generally, if somebody says, "Oh, I'm a violinist," you go, "Oh, you play the fiddle." That's like a no-no. That's it's
yeah.
It's kind of impolite and coarse.
We'll brief, I think, member Kenny Brady is called vocals and fiddles.
I can't help but feel that's Marky Smith. Like, I'll just keep you in your place. Look, I know, like, because you can't be a violinist and not have musical training. It's one of those, like, no one can play the trombone without being musically trained. You can play guitar, bass, keys, a lot of things without any musical training, but you have to be kind of, air quotes, a proper musician. So Marky Smith, I'll keep you in your place here. Look, fiddle lad.
But there's, I mean, similarly, another member who was a member for rather longer than Kenny Brady, I think, but Dave Bush is assigned machines. And,
yes, that's brilliant.
There are, there's synths and stuff going on here, and so he wasn't afraid to pull on board all sorts of stuff that wasn't just bass, drums, and guitar. Yeah.
Something else I noticed there as well: vocals and fiddles. I'm guessing Brix sung at some point. I just remember the name of her band. It's Brix and the Extricated with other full members, isn't it?
Yeah.
Didn't play with her. One of my bands, we played the night after her, which is about as gossamer thing as a link can be to somebody. But how often were other voices on full records?
I mean, there are backing vocal. I mean, again, this is where the female voice pops in now and again, particularly with Brix. But there are other backing vocals going on. But it certainly the front and center is Mark all the time. Yeah.
I'm thinking back to what we were talking about the early years, because Mark Riley's voice is very clear on some of the early recordings. And it's interesting with you now talking about the power struggle, and I know that Marky Smith didn't like the fact that Riley wanted writing credits. There's all these things, but it does put a different kind of shade, shines a different light on it, kind of knowing that being that gobby about your backing vocals is, again, you can see it as a power play almost. Right, so we say unfortunately we are running out of time, so we're going to play a song now which kind of opens up a whole new line of conversation about the fall, which I'm really looking forward to talking about, and that's what I'm going to loosely call the covers. So here's Lost in Music.
I'm lost in music. Feel so alive.
Just spirited.
Yeah. I mean, you're right in terms of I included this because I wanted to talk about them as a cover band, in the sense that actually looking on Spotify, the top 5 most streamed tracks by The Fall, 3 of them are covers, of which this is one, and Victoria is another, and I think Mr. Pharmacist is
that a
another.
cover?
Yeah, that's a
I had
cover.
no idea. Who's
I
that
think
by
a fairly
originally?
obscure garage band, but yeah, it's not a Fall original. But I mean, Mr. Pharmacist is a great example of them finding great stuff to nick and to reinterpret brilliantly. More surprising is some of their other covers, like I Can Hear the Grass Grow, and There's a Ghost in My House, and
Ghost in My House
Victoria.
makes sense to me, and again, I can see that if Marky Smith liked the Kinks, then Victoria, yep, great song.
Oh yeah, no, I mean they are great songs, and in some ways it's not surprising they covered them, but in other ways they are, I don't know, you said air quotes, mainstream tracks that they weren't afraid to do a pretty sort of poppy cover of. What I find interesting about this is that covering Sister Sledge is not something you would necessarily expect from The Fall, but to me it is their greatest cover. I mean, I just absolutely love it. Unfortunately, the clip brevity, you to get the full effect, you need to hear it right from the very beginning. And there's sort of, we talked about the weirdness at the beginning of that Witch Trials track. There's some wonderful weirdness leading into the bit that we heard, and then it really just cranks into just a brilliant rhythm section, really just pounding it out. It's fantastic. Yeah,
He did have a long record of just having really excellent musicians around him.
yeah.
And I was under the impression, I'd say years ago, before I learned a bit more about the Hall, which is still very little, that he just had a knack of being carried by other people. But I don't see it that way now. I now see it as him choosing people who, for one thing, could tolerate being in a room with him, but also people who shared a vision or could help him realize something. He's very much, he's not. When I was a teenager, I would have levelled the accusation that he's just some bloke who talks while musicians get on with the real work. I mean, that's absolutely not the case in the slightest, but you need people around you, if you're not musically trained, to help you realise things. Some really good albums. Tricky's first album, he went into the studio, he literally didn't know how anything worked, had absolutely no idea how to write a song, and that album, you could arguably say, is by the engineer. Apart from the fact it's not, because Tricky would say, no, I want this kind of sound. It's like a rumbling sound. And then I want this bit. And he'd take tapes in and say, look, this bit on this song, I want something like that. So, you didn't have to be a musician. So, yeah, Marky Smith, I sort of, it's all the parts are falling into place for me now.
Yeah, because he wasn't himself a musician. I mean, he was just the singer. And so, he needed all these other people to realize what he was putting down. And they would come up with these amazing melodies and rhythms and stuff, and it would all just gel together beautifully. Yeah.
Cool. So let's go. We're getting closer to being up to date now. So this is Reformation from 2007. Oh, God, that caught me out, that one. I was just sitting back in my comfy chair, just enjoying listening to that.
Yeah, I mean there's 6 minutes of that, and it just pounds along like that, and the energy and the power that's going into that. I mean, it has to be said, it's the album Reformation post TLC that this is from is patchy, I think, as some of the later albums are, but that track has always been a favourite of mine, and shows that, don't write off the Fall in the 2000s. There is some amazing stuff post 90s, 80s that is well worth a listen. And that I was just to, in some ways, give a taste of the sort of thing that they were doing. Yeah.
So, in your opinion, what makes a sketchy Fall track? What you say some weak tracks? What would make it?
I mean, well, in an output of, I looked up on my iPod. And I've got very few of the live albums, and I've got 807 Fall tracks on my iPod.
Okay, so
in amongst all that, there's going to be some stuff that is a bit dialed in by numbers. Let's just do a bit of a rockabilly thing that doesn't really have much of a tune beyond that, and is just a bit of mumbling going on. There'll be some like that. There'll be others and I've heard Steve Hanley talk about this. He goes, well, yeah, we needed to get something. An album, Room to Live, one of the earlier ones, which was sort of dashed out, I think, after we just went in the studio. We didn't have anything written. We just sort of came up with a few bits, and that's what happened. And quite often that would be the process. And a huge amount of the time they struck gold. But as with any band, at times it was, well, it's all right, but move on.
Okay, I've just realised I completely forgot to play my other track at the right time chronologically, so I'm going to chuck it in now. It's Rebellious Jukebox from Live at the Witch Trials, and the reason I chose this is the track for me that made me suddenly realise the Fall just weren't a band that just John Peel talked about. That there was something there that connected to me, and I really liked. So I meant to say, the reason I put it there is I always want to know what he says there. And I cannot find it. This is why I was looking up lyrics. It's a lot of but also it's kind of almost hip hop. It's just like the sort of the cant of it, the pace and the title of it. Anyway, I'll play it properly now. Apart from the fact it's a lesson in how not to mix a band, it's
yeah, that keyboard suddenly goes all over the place, doesn't it?
The drums are far too loud. So's the bass. So what did Mark Riley play? Was he the guitarist?
He played guitar and bass. Yeah. There's a really good version of that Rebellious Jukebox. One of the John Peel sessions is where I think actually the mixing is better. So yeah.
As you say though, that's singing. He is absolutely singing that chorus. That's probably one of the more conventional tracks off the first album. And something I wanted to talk about, but unfortunately we're running out of time, is how much of the influence of the sort of social commentary, because the first album got No Christmas for John Keys, which it took me years to realise was Junkies.
Junkies, yes, yeah.
And there's Industrial Estate, which is kind of, it's grim. There are no jobs. You'll just have to go there. But the band sort of seems to quite quickly wander away from that. There's always an element from the bits I've heard today of I can't even see there's a thread through any of it, actually. It's just Marky Smith talking about whatever he's reading about, I assume, or whatever he's into.
I certainly don't think you can bracket him into a overt social commentator, and I think he would have hated the thought of being that. So I think he is much more of a subtle and clever operator than to try and beat people over the head with a message. And I think he actually, I think he disliked message records on that basis.
They age, don't they? they never last.
No.
Because whatever you're making a message about, then you're gonna lose the potency of it over time.
And it veers into headlining and crass simplification and all sorts all too easily. Yeah.
Right. So final track. I'm a bit confused about this one. Because the album is called Your Future, Our Clutter from 2010, and the track is called OFYC Showcase.
Yeah, so it's an inversion of it. It's Our Future, Your Clutter. Is
I should have seen that. I should have assumed that. Let's have a blast of this. Just that sounds like something. It's great, but it does sound like a band in a studio seeing what happens.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean there was this nucleus, three guys, a sort of guitar, bass, and drums set up, who were actually for the Fall a remarkably stable lineup towards the end. For several years, it was that lineup along with Eleni Poulou, his third wife, who dipped out when they became estranged. But it's just a really muscular, almost like a garage band. He takes it back to and just no nonsense, getting some stuff down, and some of which works. There are fewer absolutely amazing hooks and melodies that there are on a load of the earlier albums, but there is a lot to admire and to get from the last 3 or 4 albums, and that's really just a taster of that. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you ever so much for these choices. I've thoroughly enjoyed kind of taking this journey through the Fall. But before we go, I wanted to talk about the human aspect, as in the fans, the people who weren't in the Fall, the people who follow the Fall, because they strike me, and I've witnessed this, as one of those bands that collects a tribe around it. So other bands that have done that, Carter, USM, if you remember them, I've had bandmates who are part of the Carter tribe, and they all still hang out, and it's a thing that binds them in a very positive way. And I imagine the Fall, having seen them, I know they're the kind of band that people will go, when they were touring, would see them every night of the tour. And I know that I've read reports of fantastically bad behaviour on behalf of Marky Smith, turning up at a gig at the garage and basically refusing to play. He came in a wheelchair, I think.
Well, that would have been late on, or slightly earlier when he was ill. Yeah.
Oh no, this was years before he was ill.
Oh, years before. Oh, I see. Yeah.
And he came on, played 2 songs, went off for 45 minutes, came back and said, "You're only getting 3 more." Tried to have people starting fights with each other, and so what's your experience? I mean, you say you're on the Facebook group. Is what sort?
Yeah, I mean, there's
like?
the Mighty Fall. I mean, I think there's more than one, but that I mean, certainly since he died in 2018. I mean, it's a bit like when Bowie died in 2016. The amount of interest in a band or an artist. I mean, Sinead O'Connor's funeral today. I mean, absolutely astonishing interest in someone. Inevitably, that gathers around someone. But I think and the number of books that have come out, there are more books that have come out since the Fall finished and since Mark died than prior. But I think it's all good, interesting stuff. And I totally hold my hand up and say, I discovered huge amounts of the Fall since 2018. I did a "you must get them all," and from only having a smattering of them, I went off and sought them all out on eBay and stuff, and have now got every Fall studio album. I mean, you can get most of them on streaming anyway, but and track down the Peel sessions and all these things, and with Spotify, you can go off and do that, and I'll happily create a playlist for you. But
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
I think that accessibility you have now through social media, through streaming, you can go and do your own voyage of discovery on the Fall, and an increasing number of people from every generation are doing that. I mean, I think quite a number of the members of the Mighty Fall group are, there'll be women in their 30s, and you go, well, hang on, that's not the Falls demographic, but the Falls demographic is spreading, and it's anybody now.
That's a lovely note to end on. Thank you very much for your time, Mark. I really appreciate it. Is there anything you want to add before we go?
No, it was great. Sorry, yes, what was going to be half an hour turned into an hour and a half, but it's been fun.
I don't want to slam the door. I mean, I've got to stop at some point because I've got work to do.
yeah.
Do you know, I've got somebody, got a couple of builders repairing my bathroom at the moment, and they've quite reverently. I didn't ask them to be quiet, but they've quite reverently not made any noise while we've been recording, which is quite amazing. So. Yeah, cool.
Well, they'll add that hour and a half to your bill. So yeah, we couldn't do anything, Governor, while you were recording. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to say goodbye. Would you like to say goodbye?
Yeah. Goodbye. Yeah.